has winter, it has fuel, it has pensioners, and it has cut. There is no more emotive cluster of words that you could possibly imagine. How do organisations like Age Concern and Crisis, how do they operate? Are they effective? Do they come onto the Today programme and other broadcasters rather effectively? They do. What about what the broadcasters and the newspapers going to do? Are they going to find pensioners literally shivering? Yes, they are. All those things have to be factored in, and I do think there's a certain naivety that they have just brought it out as a standalone measure and then forced everybody through the lobbies to support it.
Let's take a look at intertwined, actually, two big political stories of the week. George, you kick us off because it's our cover story of the week. Rachel Reeves' great gamble, and this is, of course, about the winter fuel allowance being taken away. It's not going terribly well, is it?
No. So I think there are some who are drawing the sort of premature conclusion that all's fine because they got through the parliamentary vote. Only one Labour MP voted against. That's John Trickett, the veteran left-winger. There were about a dozen unlicensed abstentions. So, on the surface, comfortable majority. But I think the real test of this policy is yet to come. To state the obvious, winter fuel payments cuts will get even more attention as we get closer to winter. The papers will be filled with stories of pensioners having to choose between heating and eating, or even worse, freezing to death. And MPs' inboxes will continue to be flooded with people saying, I'm a lifelong Labour voter, I never thought you'd do this, I feel betrayed. Ministers have been sort of assailed in supermarkets by angry voters. I think politically it's going to be very difficult. But as I say in the piece, Rachel Reeves has no option now, in her view, and I understand the logic, to press ahead with this. Because if she U-turns on this, which has become this sort of totemic measure, her whole programme is in doubt. Can she really get through the tax rises and spending cuts, potentially further welfare cuts, that she says she needs to do to stick to her fiscal rules and to turn the economy around?
Andrew, do you think it's been a huge mistake?
I think the way they've done it has been a huge mistake. I think there are ways of mitigating, which have been much discussed, involving council tax bans and other wheezes, which would have meant that 1.6 million really poor pensioners could have been protected. I think this was thrust at Rachel Reeves by the Treasury senior officialdom, who've been trying to get this measure through under the Conservatives. They went again and again and again to Jeremy Hunt, said, great idea, Chancellor, and he said, not on my Nelly. And then she came in and took it up straight off the table. So I think the way it's been done has been poor, and I think George is absolutely right. I think one thing I'd add to is I think the big question is really about the budget itself. Has this undermined Rachel Reeves's authority inside the party and inside Parliament to the point where some of the things that she was planning to do in the budget she pulls back from? I think we don't know at this stage, of course, but we have a very, very upset Labour Party. I was in the chamber for all of this, and I wouldn't say the mood was rebellious or angry. I thought the mood was beaten down. They were sort of sad, unhappy, bemused, confused, genuinely upset. And I think she's done an awful lot of damage to the morale of this government early on. And we've got another huge issue, of course, today, which is the Darzai report on the National Health Service, another big range of difficult decisions. And it's a question, as I say, of Rachel Reeves's authority and therefore also of Keir Starmer's authority, though I think we both think, don't we, George, that there may be a bit of tension between number 10 and number 11 on these issues.
Yes, well, I quoted a Starmer ally in the piece who says that the national mood is very different to 2010. And what they mean by that is that in 2010, there was a broad acceptance among the public that even if they didn't like some of the individual austerity measures, they understood, in their view, the need for austerity after the crash and after seeing the deficits. So obviously economists disagreed, but in the end, the public decided austerity was necessary, and that's why the Conservatives partly won in 2015. Now, Rachel Reeves, some of the messaging is similar to Osborne. Her allies say that's a lazy comparison, which is true, but they have very much lent into that. We've got to make tough choices. And Starmer allies have said to me, look, the country has had 14 years pretty much of austerity. It's had a cost of living crisis. It had COVID. What they want is someone to offer some hope and some positive measures that go with that. I also think there's another political problem, which is that Labour could have framed this as we're going to have to make tough choices, but there'll be Labour choices, not Conservative ones. I.e., as Keir Starmer said actually in his Rose Garden speech, those with the broadest shoulders will bear the heavier burden. Now, I think that's a coherent argument and one they could have run with. The problem with this measure, as Andrew says, is that it hits people who are pretty poor.
It's the narrowest shoulders.
People who are on as little as £11,000 a year. That's the pension credit. Now, these are not your wealthy millionaire pensioners. So I think that's
of which
muddled
there are
the message.
some, we have to acknowledge.
Yes, so 27% of pensioners now live in a millionaire household. But it's muddled the message which Rachel Reeves could have delivered, and I think will deliver at the budget, which is that this is a progressive budget. I'm raising taxes, but they're largely hitting people who are well off.
But it's important to separate the politics of this, isn't it, from the economics? Because, you know, if you look at Paul Johnson, the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, massively respected, widely viewed as completely impartial on these things. He says this is a sensible decision. He said pensioners are much better off than they were when this measure has been previously rejected. And it's just been, politically, Labour haven't sold it very well. I mean, not least taking their entire party by surprise in announcing it very, very early on.
And if you look statistically, and all the statistics are in George's excellent cover piece, then it's indeed true that pensioners, when this was introduced originally by Gordon Brown, and it's never, by the way, been uprated since, pensioners were statistically much poorer, or likely to be poorer, than the working age population. That is much less true today. Pensioners, because of the triple lock in all those subsequent years, have done relatively well. But of course, that masks the pensioners who have not done relatively well and are still really poor. And this measure hits too many of them.
You said absolutely Rachel Reeves cannot U-turn on this. But do you think there's some room for a little bit of wiggling?
I thought due to the backlash, which is definitely bigger than they expected, I thought she might leave some room for manoeuvre when she addressed the PLP. She should have said, look, I will listen to thoughts on how to protect poorer pensioners. She closed the door on that, though, by saying, look, the triple lock is going to rise. It rose by some 900 last year. Okay, inflation's been high, it reflects that. And it's going to rise by about 460 this year. And then she emphasised we're getting more people to take up pension credit. She didn't really leave any room to... Now, she may be forced to. Martin Lewis has said, and actually Michael Gove told me he favours this option, which is you take council tax bands A to D, and that's how you means test it. So it's just a less ruthless, sort of less brutal cut-off point than just pension credit. But I don't think they've left much room for that. The other problem is, of course, if you do that, you get less money. But really, it's not about the money now. It's about the politics and about her being seen to be weak.
Yeah. I mean, there are various ways you could do it. There's the so-called social tariff to exclude the poorest right across the country from some of the energy bills. You can also look at attendance allowance. But I agree with Georgia. I think that she has closed the door on all of those ways of, as it were, blunting the sharp edge of this.
Do you think it shows that the Chancellor is not a good politician? Because this, as you say, Treasury officials have put this as a suggestion for many, many years. Economically, it potentially makes sense, but politically, it's toxic. 7 out of 10 people over the age of 60 vote. 5 out of 10 under 30. So it's not a vote winner. It's caused all sorts of grief within the party. Does it just show a naivety?
What worries me is that I fear there is a kind of slightly highfalutin, we're above politics mood in the government. Now they've won the election. They were very, very intensely political in the run-up to the election and during the campaign. I think they're not being political enough now. And it's almost as if, all the clowns have gone, the idiots have gone, the corrupt people have gone. You now have grown-up, adults in the room. And if we just administer things in a grown-up way, everything will be fine and the public will be happy. That is not how life works. Politics is constant. People are constantly jostling and demanding more and demanding this and demanding that. And politicians, including the Prime Minister and including the Chancellor, in fact, particularly them, have to behave politically. And that means telling a very clear story again and again and again, not just this is why we're doing it, it's the fourth of the last lot, but we're doing it because we are going to build you a better country. We were elected to rebuild the country. This is how we're doing it. And quite soon you're going to see the effects. And it's that latter part of the story. I assume and I hope we're going to hear it from Keir Starmer at party conference and indeed from Rachel Reeves during her budget speech. But that's the bit that we're missing at the moment.
On the politics, I think Rachel Reeves' team think they have a clear political strategy. They think part of the reason Labour won the election, a big part they think, is because it was finally trusted to manage taxpayers' money. They think that ultimately the public... They insist focus groups show that the public maybe don't like these measures, but they like the government taking tough decisions. They think they will get the political credit down the line for having taken tough decisions and restored the public finances to health and delivered growth. There was a model for that. Margaret Thatcher pulled it off. George Osborne and David Cameron pulled it off in 2015. But it's a big gamble, But look, Rachel Reeves will think when the next Conservative leader stands up and says, we oppose means testing and winter fuel payments, she will reply to them, you're incapable of taking tough decisions. You would throw the economy back into crisis just in the way Liz Truss did. That's the line that they will try and use. And maybe that line does become a bit easier once you've got an opponent, because I think part of the problem for Labour at the moment is that it's almost like we're living in this sort of one-party technocratic state where the Conservatives are leaderless, so you're not having the normal political combat. Labour's Rachel Reeves' strategy is very much, at the next election, they will be able to say, you elected us because you trusted us with your money. We have turned the economy around. We've guarded the public finances. Now re-elect us and let us finish the job.
It's quite striking, though, how unpopular this idea has become amongst the public. When YouGov did some polling 30th of July, amongst all Britons, 47% supported, 38% opposed, and with the over 65s, it was a third supported, 2/3 opposed. Ben Walker, for the New Statesman, roughly updated that 24th of August, so let's fast forward a month. Massive increase in those opposed. So we've gone from 38% of Britons to 56%. And amongst the pensioners, those over 65, 82%. Will that spook Labour?
Yes.
It's incredibly unpopular.
It should spook Labour. The former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was pushing in the Commons yesterday for Labour to publish the so-called impact assessment of these measures, which brutally tells you how many people will be driven into serious poverty, how many people may die of cold over the winter because of this measure. And surprise, surprise, Keir Starmer and the government are not keen to publish that impact assessment. But I think if they had done a political impact assessment, which they should have done alongside this, they'd have thought things like, OK, what's the headline here? It has winter, it has fuel, it has pensioners, and it has cut. There is no more emotive cluster of words that you could possibly imagine. And then they will think of how do organisations like Age Concern and Crisis, how do they operate? Are they effective? Do they come onto the Today programme and other broadcasters rather effectively? They do. And then they think about what are the broadcasters and the newspapers going to do? Are they going to find pensioners literally shivering? Yes, they are. All those things have to be factored in. And then they finally say, well, what's going to be the effect on our backbenchers? I've been talking to backbenchers, we both have all week. And the number of emails and letters and people calling into constituency offices over the last week has been enormous. I was talking to another of the rebels who said he had never seen his postbag like it. So they really should have thought of all of this first. And I do think there's a certain naivety that they have just brought it out as a standalone measure and then forced everybody through the lobbies to support it.
And Labour's ratings have taken an absolute hammering because of it.
I think it's a sort of symptom of a bigger problem for the government, which is that people voted Labour in general because they wanted hope and change. At the moment, they're getting a very miserable narrative, a government that almost seems overwhelmed by the sort of scale of the task before it and saying sort of things will get worse before they get better.
Well, it ties in. Obviously, we'll do our usual listener questions episode tomorrow, but Naz actually asked us, what is the point of engaging with politics right now? Here we are, pretty much heading into austerity 3.0, as they put it. What is the point? We're not seeing anything. We're not seeing that hope that we...
It depends what you mean by engaging with politics, because there are lots of really important decisions coming up right across Whitehall, from the NHS through to the welfare budgets and so forth. Labour MPs are listened to. There is lobbying going on. Party conference will matter. It will matter what the big campaigning organisations say. It will matter certainly what the big trade unions say. These things are up there for debate, are up there for discussion. I don't get the impression that Keir Starmer is somebody who refuses to listen to the party. He's acutely aware of this. I'm sure he's very, very worried about it. So I think at a sort of parliamentary, sort of central level, there really is a point in engaging. Of course, there aren't any elections at the moment, and the opinion polls we've been talking about, in the end, don't matter very much.